Right, now we're ready to begin our study of the kings of Israel and Judah. If you want a copy of the whole history of Israel that I gave in the last session, you will find it on my website. You can download it as a picture and print it. I think it's a really good idea to keep that in your Bible. Also, the list of the kings of Israel and Judah, those are also there and you can print them out. One of the problems with memorizing them is that there are quite a lot of repetitions, and it's really quite difficult when you're reading the Bible to know which one you're talking about, and so that list will be helpful to you. Today we come to look at two of the kings, one from Israel, one from Judah. We're going to look at Abijam and Baasha, wonderful names. We start with Abijam, the son of Rehoboam. Abijam, of course, had a younger brother called Apricot Jam. Let's read from the book of Kings. Abijam's heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father. Nevertheless, for David's sake, the Lord gave him a lamp in Jerusalem. Now there are some really interesting things there. We see that Abijam's heart was not wholly committed to God. And the comparison is drawn to David. We'll find this again and again through the kings. David is the benchmark. He is the one totally committed to God. And yet we know that David was full of sins, some very serious ones. That encourages me tremendously. What it means is that God looks more at my heart than at my behavior. We make a mistake when we say to children, sins are things like adultery, murder, telling lies, and so on. And those are sins. But they're not the central issue. The central sin is a heart not committed to God. And God seems actually amazingly willing to forgive sins, but the central sin is the serious thing. And Abijam is not totally committed to God. And yet we read, God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem because he promised to David that he would. He promised to David that his lamp would never die out from Jerusalem. And Abijam was given this lamp. Now, I've stood in front of two eternal flames. One was at the grave of John F. Kennedy, a very impressive grave in a very beautiful place. And there the flame burns eternally. It's now burned for 57 years. Incredible to think that in 3 years' time, it'll be 60 years since he died. The second flame I've stood in front of, and it was much more moving, was the flame at Yad Vashem in Israel, the commemoration of the Holocaust. And there are listed the names on the floor of names that will live in infamy: Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Ravensbrück, and the others. It seems from 70 AD that David's flame had died out in Jerusalem. And for 1900 years, in a sense, it had. And then Hitler came and tried to extinguish that flame totally. But now you can go to Jerusalem and there it still burns. David's lamp hasn't passed away. It's a wonderful thing when the flame is passed down to you by your parents. I also had a father called David who passed a lamp down to me. Many a time I would pass his door and hear the murmuring going on inside, and I knew that he was talking to his God. And I know that he prayed and fasted for me. And any flame I still have has a lot to do with my dad. But even better than a second generation flame is a flame that burns for you in your own right. I am fully committed to God. That's a better flame, and that flame can be passed down to the next 2 generations from me. And so Abijam had a flame, but he was not totally committed to God. He wasn't evil, as we will find in most of the kings of Israel, but he was not totally committed. But he wasn't all bad. The time came when he went to war against Jeroboam. Very sad when brother goes to war against brother. And the armies were drawn up on either side of the river, and the kings stood each side on the hilltop and shouted to each other, as they did in those days before a battle. Look at the words that Abijam shouts to Jeroboam. But as for us, O Jeroboam, the Lord is our God, and we have not forsaken him. Behold, God is with us at our head. He's not all bad. He still is dedicated to God. There is dedication at the end, and God honors that. and we're grateful. Well, so much for Abijam. Look at the epitaph on his life. Abijam grew mighty, and he took 14 wives and had 22 sons and 16 daughters. Well, that's one definition of mighty. Certainly no problem finding an heir there. And then we're going to turn to Baasha. We're going to jump over Nadab. Baasha overthrew the family of Jeroboam and killed Nadab. I'm going to put a lightning flash every time a dynasty is overturned and a new family is instated. Because as soon as you reject the royal family, it just becomes a question of who's the strongest and they will rule. And you end up with a rule of might is right, and that's a terrible way to live. We need to be thankful every time a democracy successfully passes on power through an election without bloodshed. But there was bloodshed here. There was a lot of bloodshed here. Do you know that Baasha found every member of Jeroboam's family that he could, men, women, and children, and murdered the lot? That's a pretty brutal thing to do. Now, I know that lions, when a male lion takes over a pride and kicks out the old male, he comes in and he kills every cub of the old male. Well, in a sense, that's all right. That's animal, that's instinct. We are not under instinct. We have brains, we have consciences. And it's a terrible thing when someone comes in like Baasha and bashes the brains out of all his opponents. And then along comes a hero. We're going to meet quite a few of these heroes in the book of Kings. Some of them we're not even told their names. This one's name is Jehu. Now here we come to our first repetition. This is not the Jehu later in the list who will become a king. It takes considerable courage to confront an autocrat who's already proved himself ruthless and brutal. But Jehu does. Just look what he says to Baasha. The word of the Lord came to Jehu against Baasha, saying, "Since I have exalted you out of the dust and made you a leader over my people Israel, and you have walked in the way of Jeroboam and have made my people Israel to sin, I will utterly sweep you away. Anyone belonging to Baasha who dies in the city, the dogs will eat. Anyone who dies in the field, the birds of the heavens shall eat." Now, it takes great courage to say things like that. He's one of my heroes. Another of my heroes is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Still a very young man, he wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship, which has become a classic. In it he says, when God calls a man, he calls him to die. As the wheels of the Nazi regime started to turn and crush people, he said it's not enough for the church to bind up the wounds of those crushed by the wheels. We've got to put a spoke in the wheel. He was a man of peace, basically a pacifist, and it cost him tremendously to agree to be part of a plot to assassinate Hitler, but he did it. As a result, he was imprisoned and tortured, and then 1 week before the Americans were due to liberate the camp where he was being held, the 9th of April, at dawn, they stripped him naked and hanged him. A hero of the faith, and assuredly his lamp still burns.